This is kind of a new format for me. I've had a couple of people say, actually, I'd come on and talk about a book that I like with you. So I think I'm going to do a couple of those. But number one is get rid of rhetorical questions from vocabulary. So replacing have you tried with what's the real challenge here for you? This is kind of the doctor thing of the presenting problem is most often not the real problem. You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zingage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. All right, welcome back to another episode of Home Care Hindsight, brought to you by Zingage. This one's going to be a little bit different. It's something I've wanted to do for a little while and just kind of have been putting on the back burner. So this will be like a solo episode. And one of the things that I want to start to do is to bring in some kind of insights and learnings from outside of, just the conversations that I have and bring those into the podcast. So I've been reading, I've got a little baby at home. I don't read a whole lot, but on runs, audiobooks, on planes, it's a great opportunity to kind of catch up and do some learning. And so was looking into some books and just to kind of give some context for this episode. So the team that I lead here at Zingage is growing quite a bit. Like this time last year, it was me, and now we've got like 6 people on the team in total, and it's going to continue to grow. And so one of the things that means is that my role is changing, and so that's got some growing pains with it. It's got some stuff that I feel like I'm not that great at. And the biggest thing that I think has changed is previously, the best thing that I could do with my time was be customer facing, prospect facing, talking to people, having sales conversations, and really any like internal time, I don't want to say it was like wasted time, but was not revenue generating time. You could make the argument that there was some ROI with like if we do this and the results are such and such, then it was a good use of time. But like ultimately in the back of my mind, I was like any internal time, any time not spent face to face with clients, with prospects, with leads, with people in the industry is wasted time. And now, given that, I've got a bunch of other folks that are doing much more of the actual like direct sales work, it means my role is like significantly different. And so that's been an adjustment. And it's not one that I think I'm doing like amazing at, I'm the best at, but, trying to really think through strategically how to leverage my time and be more thoughtful about the team and how I lead this team as it grows. And so anyways, I came across this book that may be familiar to a lot of people called The Coaching Habit. And I don't exactly know what I'm going to call this like series of episodes, but it's like kind of like a book club, I guess. And so I just wanted to share some of the kind of insights that I've had from reading this book and from applying it with my team, because it might be useful to some of the folks who either can look back at like when they had to make this kind of transition in their business, or are currently in the middle of making this kind of transition, trying to figure out how to up-level and upskill the folks in their business to be able to make these kinds of transitions better. And so anyways, hopefully this helps. And if you like this format of episode, let me know. If you don't like this format of episode, let me know, because I want this to be really useful. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and hopefully, is something that resonates with the folks who listen to this episode, this show. So anyways, diving right in. So the book is The Coaching Habit by Michael Stanier. He's Australian, so I probably did a really bad job with his name. He's got a middle name in there that I'm not going to even attempt. But it's called The Coaching Habit. Say less, ask more, and change the way you lead forever. And the main reason that this really stood out to me is I think like as a leader, I'm somebody who I think is quick to like, I want to be the smartest guy in the room. I want to be the person who gives advice. I want to be the person that people look to and are like, oh, that David, he really knows what he's talking about. He really can solve stuff. And so I one of the things that I find is that a lot of my like one-on-one conversations with my team start with like somebody bringing me a problem and me like asking a couple of clarifying questions about that problem, but then pretty quickly jumping into like, I don't know, like pontificating is probably too strong a word, but kind of dive right into solving that problem for them. And there's an immediate dopamine hit that comes with having somebody bring you a problem and making that problem go away pretty quickly by solving that problem. And to be fair, like I've learned enough through being married for almost 11 years now that like just like answer like being like, oh, let me solve that problem for you is not always the best idea because it can lead to saying that problem that was really stressing you out was actually like a really simple problem to solve anyways. And so you should feel, I don't know, silly for having brought me this problem that ultimately was like not that difficult to solve because I solved it real quick. I think I try to validate that the problems that people are bringing me are real ones and that they're not dumb and I've got a really smart team. And so typically they're bringing me problems that are real and that I can help with. But the biggest problem that creates for me is it's like, it's more work on my plate and ultimately is creating this kind of cycle of dependence where I'm necessary for the thing to keep moving. And I think, I've talked several times in the show about kind of hit by a bus problems, which is like, who's the person in the business that if they got hit by the bus, the thing would stop. And too many times, and this is something that I'm trying to really focus on, like I'm kind of a hit by a bus problem in our business. And so that, causes a lot of challenges when we come back to somebody brings me a problem, I solve it really quickly. And so one of the lines from the book is, advice is overrated, curiosity is underrated. And while I think that I'm a pretty curious person naturally, I think that I'm somebody who really wants to dig in and understand. I think as soon as I feel like I've understood the situation enough, I give advice. And ultimately, that's not the best way for me to help my team grow and come into their own roles and be really effective. So, one of the first things that I realized that I was doing is I was like, man, I'm giving way too much advice. So I was like, let me switch to asking questions more. So I started to ask questions. And the thing that stood out to me from this book, The Coaching Habit, is one of the major things that the author points out is that sometimes you ask questions that are statements. So instead of asking a question that solicits or elicits an answer, you ask a rhetorical question that doesn't. And it's the same thing as giving advice. You're just doing it with a question mark at the end. And so often I find myself saying, what if we insert the rest of that sentence there? Or have you tried, insert the rest of that sentence there? Or have you thought about, insert the rest of that sentence there? And it's one of those things that ultimately I'm creating the same problem, but it's just kind of wrapped in a slightly different dressing and leaves me in the same situation as I was previously. So anyways, there's a few kind of key takeaways from the book, and it's worth picking up. It's worth taking a look at, and that hopefully will be useful to the folks who are listening to this episode. So, takeaway number 1: the job is to stay curious just a little bit longer. And one of the kind of metrics, I don't know if that's the right word, but one of the maybe KPIs that the author shares is asking one more question than feels comfortable. And then to really get comfortable with silence. And if you've been listening to this for a while, you know that part of my background is as a youth pastor. And one of the things that I learned is that teenagers need a lot of silence. And so I'm pretty good at that already. But I think asking that one more question, feels like you've gotten maybe a little too far out on a limb. And you are having, you're in a fairly vulnerable place because the conversation's no longer in your control. But so, really just leaning into that discomfort, getting comfortable with the silence, getting comfortable with asking enough questions to really understand what's going on, but also to start to have your team think through, what they need to think and say and do next. So anyways, he's got a list of 7 questions. And if you want to write these down, these are really good ones. And one of the things that I've learned, sales ultimately is the process of asking a series of good questions that guide people through a journey that you want them to go on. And ultimately being open to where the twists and turns of that journey go. But these are while they are formulaic, are seem to be, from limited use so far, kind of magic. So the first one is opening things up with what's on your mind. And again, like that may seem like it's too open-ended. It may seem like you're already kind of out on a limb a little bit and that you're not really controlling the conversation, but really understanding like what's top of mind for that person. And he's got some really good advice on like how to kind of set some guardrails, because we've all got people on our team who, if given the opportunity, will kind of just ramble and eventually run out of steam, you hope. But sometimes that can be this kind of, we're circling the drain here and really, wish we could get things in the right direction. But what's on your mind is a good way to start off the conversation and really understand what's top of mind. And with repetition, we start to get to a place where people are conditioned to a degree to start the conversation in a more, helpful direction. And then his kind of magic question, I think of the list of the 7, this is probably the one that stood out to me as having the most importance, and the one that people probably skip over the most often is, and what else? So, you've asked what's on your mind, and what else? And what else? And what else? And you really want to get to the place where they're like, well, there's kind of nothing else. That's all the things that I have to share. And it's a way to just kind of pull at that thread and get, all the stuff out in the open. And then once we feel like we've kind of exhausted the well of all the things that are on somebody's mind in a one-on-one, for example, the next question that we want to transition to is, what's the real challenge here for you? I think all of those words matter. What's the real challenge here for you? I think the for you is the most important part of formulation of this question. And again, like I'm somebody who, I'm kind of like Woody from Toy Story, like you pull a string on my back and the same like 7 phrases come out. And so I'm a big believer in like the way that you craft a sentence really causes people to respond in a certain kind of way. So I think what's the real challenge here for you? Like that's maybe more words than is necessary strictly. Reminds me of Kevin from The Office. Why use many word when less word will do, or whatever the quote is. I completely butchered that. But what's the real challenge here for you? Real for you, I think really stand out to me as important here. And it gets to the heart of like, okay, we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff, but like, what's the real challenge? What's really going on? And I think that's where, it becomes really important to allow the silence to sit. So I think ultimately with what's the real challenge here for you, when somebody brings like a team conflict or, maybe like a missed target or something like that, asking the question, what's the real challenge here for you, is more around like, I'm not sure how to proceed. I need new strategy. Sometimes there's, I think, some natural like fear for job security and those kinds of things. And so really getting to the heart of the issue and understanding like what's really going on here, I think is really important. So question number 4 of the 7 questions that make a huge difference is, what do you want? And I think like sequencing is important here, right? If you start out with what do you want, like it doesn't work quite as well. But if we wait until after, a few of the other, as the conversation has continued to develop and proceed, the reason that this is so impactful is like most people talk about other people, about circumstances, about things that are external to them. And really this is like asking the internal question. And I think one of the things that I've paid a lot of attention to, and that as I add more people to the team, like this is something that continues to be top of mind, is like, what's the thing that really motivates our people? What are the things that they're working for in their life? I remember hearing, I think it was Sarah Wilson said at a panel a couple of years ago, one of the things that she really wants to understand is like, what our caregivers are saving for? Like, is there a kid that's going to college? Is there a car that people are trying to buy? Is there like a magic number that gets them to be able to like move out from a roommate and go somewhere else? And so really understanding like the intrinsic motivation and what goes on, in people's internal kind of monologues is important, both for like us to understand as leaders, but also to like shine a light on for people themselves. Because often like I think people get so trapped in kind of the day-to-day routine that it's really difficult to, really take a step back and have the kind of clarity and identify where priorities are out of alignment or whatever the case may be. And so, I think this is one of those opportunities to ask somebody the question. And again, you kind of feel like you're out on a limb because you're not in control of the conversation, but having people say, what it is that they really want what they're looking for out of their role. A good friend of mine, I was actually there's an event with Emily Isbell, and one of the stories that she told, I think really stood out to me was like she had a scheduler that she'd hired who'd previously been a caregiver and, had a lot of success with bringing caregivers into the office, helping people make that transition from being a caregiver to like working at a desk on a computer and stuff like that. And there's all kinds of unique challenges to promoting caregivers into that kind of role. And you wouldn't do it with just any caregiver, but this is one of the things that I think Emily really points to as like being critical to the success of her business that she ran and that she encourages other people to do. Again, you got to be really thoughtful. It's got to be the right fit. But she had one person that she'd promoted to an office role, and then ultimately just it was not the right fit. Things were slipping through the cracks. Details were getting missed, and in scheduling, like that's of critical importance. And so ultimately, she had a conversation with that individual and said, hey, I don't think this is working out. I think it would be best for you to go back to being a caregiver. And the response was, I'm so glad you said that. Like, I'm totally in over my head. And so I think similar to the like, what do you want question, sometimes people surprise you with how far they've already thought ahead, but just haven't been given, the opportunity to change. Okay. Question number 5 of 7 is how can I help? And this is, I think, kind of gets at the heart of some of the shortcomings that I've had and have identified as like, I jump in with an offer to help, whether or not it's accepted, whether or not it's asked for. And so understanding like where they see the gaps in their plan, could you sanity check this one thing? There's one meeting I'd like for you to sit down on. Could you help with this one part of the process? Those are the kinds of things that, okay, I'm not taking 5 or 6 things onto my plate. I'm taking like one thing that'll take like 10 minutes onto my plate. And so if part of this is to really emphasize the kind of self-sustainability that we want to cultivate with our team, really like kind of making the help requests bounded and having like defined size and shape is I think really helpful to limit the number of things that are coming on to our plates as leaders, but also, kind of maximizing the way that somebody's inhabiting their own role. So then, I think this one is a really good one. I think most of us in the home care world are experts at saying yes to way too many things and stretching ourselves thin. And, this has come up, I think, a number of times of every time we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else. There's only so many things we can do at a high level with excellence. There's only so many new initiatives we can take on at once. And so the question is, if we're saying yes to this, what is it that we're saying no to? And so this is, again, like a way to make sure that our teams are able to manage all the stuff that's on their plate, prevent some of the burnout that happens in every business, but I think in particular happens within home care. Also, like we can only do so many things well at a time. And so instead of committing to like 6 projects and executing on 4 of them with 50% excellence, like let's find the 2 or 3 things that we really need to crush to be able to do it. And so I think one of the things that really stood out to me is making that choice explicit, is saying, if we say yes to this, what are the things that we're saying no to? And again, like this is a hard question. I think there's a lot of good, correct answers to this question. I think it's going to result in some silence. And so super important to be able to get comfortable with that, lean into that. And then the final question here, this sounds a little self-serving, but I don't think it is what was the most useful for you? And this is where we're really leaning into some self-reflection, leaning into an opportunity to say, this stuff was the most important to me. And then, okay, great. I can focus more on that sort of thing next time, and I can leave off some of the fat that I brought into the conversation that wasn't, actually that useful in the first place. Just read the book. It's worth taking a look at. But hopefully those 7 questions, implementing 1 or 2 of those could be really useful. So some very specific applications here, and then we'll kind of close it out. And again, let me know what you think. This is kind of a new format for me. I've had a couple of people say, actually, I'd come on and talk about a book that I like with you. So I think I'm going to do a couple of those. But number 1 is get rid of rhetorical questions from vocabulary. So replacing have you tried with what's the real challenge here for you? this is kind of the doctor saying of the presenting problem is most often not the real problem. And so, getting underneath, there's it's like the 3 levels of why in sales. The first reason is a rapport answer. And so really getting to the heart of the issue is super important. And if, like me, you immediately jump into advice giving mode, you're unlikely to uncover what the real challenge is. I think number 2 is giving people the space to share more about what's going on in their world, getting, kind of deeper into the actual issues, better identifying like what's really going on. And that's when someone finishes explaining instead of jumping in. I think like so many times in conversation, it's like I'm thinking about the thing I'm going to say next because I have to say something after you finish saying something. And instead, continuing to put the ball back in their court and say, and what else? Giving them the floor, giving them the opportunity to share more about what's in their world. And then I think like this is something that's, I think, the easiest to skip over, but I think can be the highest impact if we're really looking to get our people to start really owning their role, being thoughtful and strategic about their decision making, is to end every one-on-one with what was most useful for you. And, even drilling down and saying like, hey, what's one action you're going to take in the next week as a result of this conversation? So anyways, that's the first of these book clubs. Again, if you think it was a horrible idea, let me know. If you like this, if you'd like to hear more of it, if you have suggestions on books and stuff, I'm always looking for ways to continue to grow and level up myself and my team. And so, really appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll be back next week with more typical kind of interview-based episode. But I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. On behalf of the team here at Zingage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zingage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.